Let me give you a couple of things from people I generally respect. Chris Rufo, I really respect. I'm totally against selling this land. Nobody is going to build affordable housing deep in the Olympic Peninsula, which is one of the most beautiful places in the country. I agree. It's in Washington State. It's on the coast, and it's a rainforest. I want my kids hiking, fishing, and camping on those lands, not selling them off for some tax credit scam. This is a question I want to ask Mike Lee about. That's really good. Matt Walsh chimes in. I'm very opposed to the plan. The biggest environmentalists in the country are and always have been conservatives who like to hunt and fish. We don't just call ourselves environmentalists because the label has too much baggage and the practice always means just communist. Really, we are naturalists in the tradition of Teddy Roosevelt, and that's why most of us hate the idea of selling off federal lands to build affordable housing or whatever. I want to get to affordable housing here in a second. Preserving nature is important. You think so? It's a shame we haven't that we've allowed conservation to become so left-wing coded. It never was historically. No, and it still isn't. You're right about one thing, Matt. We are the best conservators. We actually live in these places. We use these places. We respect the animals. We respect the land. We know how the circle of life works. So I agree with you on that. But affordable housing, why do you say affordable housing or whatever? Are you afraid those will be black people? I'm just playing devil's advocate. You're just afraid of the black people? You don't want any poor people in your neighborhood or your forests? That's not what they mean by affordable housing, and I know that's not what you mean either. But what we mean by affordable housing is if you take a look at the percentage of land that is owned in some of these states, you can't live in a house in some of these states close to anything for, less than $1 million because there's no land. There's plenty of land all around. And some of it, let's just talk about Utah. Some of it is like the surface of the moon. But no. We're not going to hunt and fish on the surface of the moon. But we can't have you live anywhere. You have to open up. There is a balance between people and the planet. And I'm sorry, but when you're talking about 0.5%, and we're not talking about Yellowstone, we're not. Benji Backer, the Daily Caller, he says, United States is attempting to sell off 3 million acres of public land to be used for housing development through the addition of the spending bill. This small provision to the big, beautiful bill would put land in Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming at risk, without so much as a full and fair debate by members of both sides of the political aisle. I'll talk to him about this. The irony is the addition of this provision by Republican-led Senate goes entirely against conservation legacy of conservation. President Trump made a promise to revive this legacy, yada, 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 more about Teddy Roosevelt. Then let me give you this one from Lomez. Is Mike Lee part of a sinister plan to sell off federal land? This plan to sell off public lands is a terrible proposal that doesn't make any sense under our present circumstances and would be a colossal political blunder, but I'll try to be fair to base Mike Lee and at least have him explain where this is all coming from. Okay, I'm going to have him do that in about 30 minutes, but let me give you just my perspective on this. I'm from the West. I love the West. I don't hike myself. I think there's about 80% of the people who say, I just love to hike, and they don't love to hike. They never go outside. But I'm at least willing to admit I don't like to hike, but I love the land. I live in a canyon now that I would love to just preserve this whole canyon in my lifetime. I'm not going to rule from the grave, but in my lifetime to protect this so it remains unspoiled because it is beautiful. But we're talking about selling 3 million acres of federal land, and it's becoming dangerous. That it's a giveaway or a threat to nature. But can we just look at the perspective here? The federal government owns 640 million acres. That is nearly 28% of all land in America. How much land do we have? Well, that's about the size of France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom combined. They own and hold pristine land that is more than the size of those countries combined. And most of that is west of the Mississippi, where the federal control smothers the states. Okay, shuts down opportunity, turns local citizens into tenants of the federal estate. You can't afford any house because you don't have any land. And, the states can't afford to take care of all this land. You know why the states can't afford? Because you can't charge taxes on 70% of your land. Anyway, so meanwhile, the folks east of the Mississippi, like Kentucky, Georgia, Pennsylvania, you don't even realize, how little of the land you actually control, or how easy it is for the same policies to come for you. And those policies are real. Now, look, I am not talking about, I'm disturbed by by Chris Rufo saying that it is the Olympic forest. I mean, you're not going to live in the rainforest. I mean, I'd like to hear the case on that. But we're not talking about selling Yellowstone or paving over Yosemite or anything like that. We're talking about less than 0.5% of federal land that is remote, hard to access, or mismanaged. I live in the middle of a national forest. So I'm surrounded on all sides by a national forest and then BLM land around that, and then me. You know who the worst neighbor I have is? The federal government. The BLM land is so badly mismanaged, they don't care what's happening. Yeah, I'm going to call my neighbor in Washington, D.C. to have them fix something. It's not going to happen. If something's wrong with that land, me and my neighbors, we end up, fixing the land. We end up doing it because the federal government sucks at it. Okay, so here's less than 0.5%. Why is it hard to access that land? Well, let me give you a story. Yellowstone. Do you know that the American bison, we call it the buffalo, but it's the American bison. There are no true American bison in any place other than Yellowstone. Did you know that? Here's almost an endangered species. It's the only true American bison is in Yellowstone. Ranchers, I would love to raise real American bison, and I would protect them. I would love to have them roaming on my land. But you can't. You can't. Real bison, you can't. Why? Because the federal government won't allow any of them to be bred. In fact, when Yellowstone has too many bison on their land, you know what the federal government does? Kills them and buries them with a bulldozer. Instead of saying, hey, we have too many, we're going to thin the herd, let's just put them on a truck, and here's some ranchers that want to, help repopulate the United States with bison. No, you can't do that. Why? I don't know. It's the federal government. Stop asking questions. Do you know what they've done to our bald eagles? I have pictures of piles of bald eagles that they'll never show you. They'll never show you. You can't have a bald eagle feather. It's against the law to have a feather from a bald eagle. If it's flying and a feather falls off, you can't pick it up because they're that sacred. But I have pictures of piles of bald eagles dead from the windmills, and nobody says a thing. Okay, but we're talking about lands. States can't afford to manage it. Okay, but how can the federal government? Now, this is really important. The federal government is, $35 trillion in debt, or are we $45 trillion now? I'm not sure. Our entitlement programs, all strained, infrastructure crumbling, and yet we're still clinging to millions of acres of land that the federal government can't maintain. Okay, yeah, they can, because they can always print money. We can't print money in the state, so we can't afford it. Okay, hear me out. The BLM, Forest Service, Park Service, billions of dollars behind in maintenance, roads, trails, fire breaks. Everything is falling apart. So what's the real plan here? Well, the Biden administration was the first one that was really open about it, pushing for what was called 30 by 30. They want 30% of all U.S. land and water under conservation by 2030. But the real goal is 50-50. 50% of the land and the water in the government's control by 2050. Half of the country locked up under federal or elite-approved protection. Now, You think that's not going to affect your ability to hunt, fish, graze, cattle, harvest, timber, just live free? You're not going to be able to go on those. It's not going to be conservatives who stop you from hunting and fishing. It will be the same radical environmental ideologues who see the land as sacred over people. I mean, unless it's in your backyard, your truck, or your deer stand, then I guess you can't touch that land. Here's something that no one is talking about, and it goes to the 2030. The Treasury right now, and they started under Obama, and they're still doing it now. Under Biden, and they're doing it now. The Treasury is talking about putting federal land on the national balance sheet. What does that mean? Well, it's going to make our balance sheet look so much better because it looks like we have so much more wealth and we'll be able to print more money. What happens, you put something sacred like that on your balance sheet and the piggy bank runs dry and all of the banks are like, okay, well, you can't pay anymore. What happens in a default? What happens if there's catastrophic failure? You don't get to go fish on that land because that land becomes Chinese. You think our creditors, foreign and domestic, won't come knocking? What happens when federal land is no longer a national treasure, but a financial asset that can be seized or sold or controlled by giant banks or foreign countries? That land that you thought you'd always have access to for your kids, for your hunting lodge, for your way of life, that is really important. But it might not be yours at all because you had full faith in the credit of the United States of America. So what is the alternative? Now, conservatives are saying we got to let the federal government conserve all of our land because they're so good at everything that they do. Right. Okay. Here's an alternative. And I know it's going to sound like madness, but hear me out for a second. Let the people who live near the land steward the land. Let the ranchers, the farmers, the sportsmen, the private conservationists do what we've done for generations. I'm not talking about selling all the federal land by any stretch of the imagination. I love the national parks. I love our national forests. They are important to us. But did you know that 80% of Americans' wetlands are privately held? 80% of our wetland, private land. Or some of the most successful wildlife recoveries, from white-tailed deer to ducks to wild turkeys. That's not happening because of Washington, D.C., but because of a partnership between private landowners and sportsmen's groups. Private ownership works. Private stewardship works because it's accountable, local, and incentivized. You break it, you fix it. You profit from the land, you protect it. This is the way of America. And I know we just think that everything is just going to be owned by big, huge bosses that are smoking cigars in the back room. And, a lot of times that's true, but it doesn't have to be true. This is really important to all of us. Federal sprawl, faceless management from thousands of miles away, that doesn't work. So when you hear media panic over 3 million acres of land, remember, this is not a sellout. I believe it's a buy-in to freedom, responsibility, constitutional order. They are trying to buy up to 50% of the land. If you sell 0.5% of what they currently hold, you're down to 27.5% of all the land in America instead of 28%. And next year, they want to be at 29. And the year after that, at 30. What are you talking about? Washington doesn't protect anything. Washington destroys everything. I have no problem. You want to turn all of this land over to the state? Then turn it over to the state where it belongs. It does not belong in the hands of the federal government. You can have national parks. You can have national forests. Okay. But the state should not be told by the government that they can't have access to between 60 and 80% of the land in their own state. You want to talk about fascism? What is that? Honestly, I want the federal government to get out of my way. Sportsmen, ranchers, patriots. I don't know. We can care for it like we always have. Because it's not just about land. It is about our way of life. It is about our traditions. It is about our liberty. And that's the most important one. When you have the federal government claiming that they already have the money being pulled off every year. They have the money pulled off so they can buy more land. This is the only thing that they actually have a slush fund for that, your Social Security, screw that. But they have the money to buy more land. And why are they buying it? Not so you can hunt and fish, but so they can push you into the cities. You're not going to be able to hunt and fish on that land by 2050. Your kids won't have that opportunity. Why do you think that all around the big national parks, they are letting the infrastructure, the roads and everything else in places where it's private land? Why doesn't the government fix the roads, fix the infrastructure? Because they don't want people there. They want to keep pushing people into the cities. We can disagree on this, on what percentage or what lands or whatever. We can debate all of that. But if you don't take into consideration that the federal government is trying to gobble up all of the land, read the UN Agenda 2030, read Agenda 2050, read the World Economic Forum, read anything from these radical environmentalist groups. They're all leftists. Why do we give up the word environmentalist? He's right, because it just means communist to us, which should tell you everything you need to know. Who is leading all of this? Globalists, communists, radicals, radical environmental. You know what? I will listen to the farmers. I'll listen to the ranchers. I'll listen to any real, true conservative that understands and has read Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050, the World Economic Forum's plans. I'll listen to you. As long as you know it, we can have a debate. But you've got to teach that first.